so they're farther than farthest star.
Yeah.
The farthest.
They're beyond the farthest star.
Yeah. So consequently, we don't even bother.
So don't ask about Crucible.
Yeah, I keep coming up with stuff with it for it.
Yeah, yeah.
When it comes out, it's gonna be great. It's our horror tool set. Yeah, it's got an original setting. It will be just like 10,000 Bullets is to the street noir setting. Farthest Star is the sci-fi. It'll produce an original setting and all the tools you need to build your own.
What about what would be a cyberpunk genre?
Shatterpunk, yes.
Yeah.
So some people, believe it or not, let me tell you the origin of our first mistake as a company.
Oh yeah.
And that was the first Christmas announcement where we said, Crafty Games exists. And we listed a lot of things which many people are familiar with, through brief conversations at cons and things like that, and forum blathering and other stupid things we've done. And we basically said, this is our AEG schedule. We're going to pitch it, and we're going to just do it, and it'll be great, and it'll be so easy, and we just put them in the PDF. Yeah. So Shatterpunk is the cyberpunk setting. That world is quite fleshed out.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I go back to in between projects and like, oh yeah, I'll script a little here and there because I am a cyberpunk junkie. And old school stuff. I wouldn't set it in the 80s because I love history, alternate history. There's another project beyond that which is all about alternate history.
Right. Each of us, we each took we carved out the genres that we wanted. So I'm a big horror squid. So Crucible fell into horror fell into my camp, and from that was born Crucible. And he's a big cyberpunk guy and street guy, which is why 10,000 Bullets and 10,000 Bullets existed before.
Yeah.
Scott's a really old school sci-fi guy. He likes, what does he call it? Firm sci-fi, I think is what he calls it.
Yeah, it's not hard sci-fi, but just believable in a sort of realistic context.
Exactly.
There's no matter replicators and crap like that.
And people act in plausible ways. Races have plausible reasons for existing. So he and they don't consist of facial ridges.
Yeah, forehead.
So he took the sci-fi thing. So and there are a couple other genres actually that we haven't covered yet that we've got waiting in the wings and that we haven't announced because we're getting smarter as a company. And those are actually being developed.
So, so the problem is we have to keep answering for things we said in 2005.
Right.
And you have every right to ask. So anyway, Shatterpunk is one of those things that I would dearly love to do, and but it's so far out.
Now the good thing is that Mastercraft will make all of these projects a lot easier because what happens, the original plan, which I still am astounded we ever tried to float, was bolting on genres to 2.0, which in a lot of ways would have worked, but unfortunately it had a logic barrier, it had a work barrier, there were a whole bunch of different problems with it. It wasn't a standalone product series. So now with FantasyCraft, we have one standalone product, does fantasy in terminology that you understand and accept, and it's a simpler system. Well, when we get to 10,000 Bullets, in theory, because this is all being built from the ground up to do this, we would take the 80% of the system that applies universally, and we would take the other 20%, chuck it, and say, okay, what do we replace it with? And so we've got like the Empire system, which is being put in there, which will allow you to build your own gangs and your own legal empires and such. And for Farthest Star, we would have alien construction rules. And so it becomes a lot easier for these books to be made real. So there's been sort of a delay. Those who were watching who would watch last year's presentation and directly follow with this, might look at it and go, wow, why has it taken a year to make all this happen? And there's a whole bunch of reasons, and one of them is that it's taken us this long to actually get that base system going and make all the decisions that are needed to actually make all these other projects fall together more easily. So we feel like for the first time in a long, long time, we're actually in a really good place to move forward. So for one thing, we're going back after the show, and we're not working on anything that we were working on when we left, well, except for FantasyCraft. But even then, we're working on new parts of FantasyCraft. We're not going back to things, which is great. We're actually only looking forward.
So the parts that are done are fully edited?
The parts that you're looking at in the book are fully edited. There's a couple, I'm going to run them through one more time just because I'm anal.
We do know that there's page XXs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
we don't have the final.
Yes, the reds of the blueprint.
Right, yeah. Those have to be filled in when we have page numbers.
Exactly.
Exact references.
There's a blah that we go through and we search for those to change them.
I have a playtester on my playtest team that thinks the blah is the greatest thing ever. He loves it just reading through and a sentence stops and it just says blah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Blah.
But other than that, other than the XXs and the blahs and the blue text, everything in there is final. And we've got the other half of chapter 2, which is feats, really close to done.
Yeah.
Chapter 1's like 80% done. That's all the classes and creating a character.
Right. We just have to revise them after the changes.
Gear and character creation, character and monster creation. It's the NPC creation chapter.
Yeah. And there's basically a full draft. Together.
There's drafts of those, but they're a little bit further off. And then chapter 7 will probably be the last. That's the GM chapter. That'll be the last thing, right?
Right.
Because it needs to have the full view of the book.
So is there just creation rules for monsters, or will there be some sort of compendium creatures?
Oh no, we'll have a bestiary. Yeah, just
Yeah.
like in the spell chapter, we will have a grimoire.
Yeah, and then of course all the rules to build your own monsters and advice on building your own monsters and conversion for monsters
Yeah,
from
absolutely.
existing
Other systems.
other unnamed systems.
And eventually a bag full of monsters.
If someone
It's kind
strikes
of
us,
like menagerie, yeah.
Menagerie.
Oh, do you? Okay.
What about spell creation rules?
Oh,
creation
yeah, I
rules.
forgot about that.
Spell creation is one of those things that we haven't really talked about. I mean, I think it's
Scott and I have talked quite a bit about spell creation rules. They're really hard to build, especially for our game, because spell casting is spellcasting in Mastercraft and Spycraft is a little bit unconventional in a lot of ways. Here's the chief, and I'll give you an example. One of the chief ways that it's different is that we went through all of the SRD spells, and we said, okay, these 12 spells, just pulling a number out of the air, these 12 spells all do one version of fire damage or another. Why is it that this spell, which is easier to cast, it causes more damage at range than this spell, which is harder to cast and does less damage at melee range? So we actually stripped all those things apart and said, okay, we're going to take all the names. This one sounds weakest. This one sounds more powerful. We're going to make them universally effective. We're going to make them not like same damage values, but like we're going to have damage values that make sense within a scale. We're going to have damage values that make sense within a type. So certain types of damage generally do the same dice of damage, things like that. We're going to make sure they have the same effects. We're going to make sure they increment properly, which means that the end result is that your fire spells, for instance, won't necessarily look like their SRD counterparts.
What is this?
As a system reference document, it's basically D&D.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So your fireball in our game may not look like, it'll look like physically a fireball from D&D, but it may not do the same amount of damage. And it may not be the cure-all that people are used to for a lot of circumstances, but it's balanced, and it makes sense consistently within our magic system. And there's a lot of little shifts like that where it's, for instance, Scott and I, and Alex, we're all opposed to mind control. Mind control is an awful ability in any game. So any abilities that originally had controlled minds in D&D don't exist in our game, or were dramatically changed to be much more playable in Fantasy Craft. So there's a lot of things like that that we go through, and we actually analyze every spell from the ground up.
Other spells which have like a giant switch, you know, you're flipping,
Right.
like Wish or
Right.
Shatter. Some of these spells have actually just been.
I love Wish
reconciled.
now.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Wish is entirely, it's very different.
Yeah, it's very different.
But it's you know, there's actually lower levels of Wish.
Right.
So
There's several levels of wishing.
Right, and you know what you can ask for depends on the level you're casting and
Right.
stuff like that. The price is generally the same across the board. So
Right. All of them are balanced against each other within the same system. All of them make sense within the same system.
Power words are different too.
Power words
Which
are
power
different.
words will be in the next product. So.
So,
Yeah.
and that's all still under development. We can give you a little bit of specifics, but